Computer. Yay! Okay, so let's restart that. Hi, my name is Casey Van Putten, and I'm a certified EFT practitioner. I am so excited today to share with you Mrs. Lynn Staley. She is an expert on grief, and this is a topic that I think is really, really important now, just for so many people, but also for me personally. I know that I've been really open with you guys about the fact that I lost my father-in-law last month. And so I was just looking for creative ways to utilize EFT, which is an amazing tool for myself. And also just, I've never lost anyone before really besides old grandmas and grandpas. And to me, this was just really different. It was more of a shock to my system. And so I just wanted to reach out, and I thought, well, since I was asking questions anyway to Lynn, that I thought maybe you guys would benefit from this information as well. So this is Lynn. Lynn, want to say hi?
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Casey.
Yes, I just want to make sure that you guys can, if you're there, just say hello, and I can make sure that we are coming strongly through to you. Okay. All right, I see some eyeballs there. Okay. So, Lynn, I would just love for you to kind of share your background on how you became like a grief expert. Like, what inspired you to kind of learn more about grief?
Well, it was about 20 years ago that I had a profound loss of my own. And when I was searching for information to help me feel better, I found myself just becoming a student of this subject, grief and loss. And I really came to the conclusion that our culture doesn't support people, doesn't know how to show up for people. And so I thought, I think this is what I want to do, is companion people in this. So I came at it through life experience. And my initial step was being trained by the Grief Recovery Institute. They have a program called the Grief Recovery Method. And that is a curriculum-driven program with reading and homework. And I found that people could kind of walk through that intellectual door, and then we could get to that emotional piece, that underlying piece that our culture doesn't do so well.
Yeah, and I'm
So
noticing
I've
I'm
been a
noticing that as well,
companion.
right? Yeah. I think I think you're just spot on with that cultural piece, because I'm noticing even with my husband, like, people don't know what to say. And I think a lot of people, when they don't know what to say, like, just don't say anything, and then they start like ghosting you, and you're like,
Right.
and it could be someone that really means well and loves you. They just don't know what to do.
And when it's happening to us, we don't realize that it's their form of self-protection, because then they have to look at the emotion it might be bringing up in them.
Mm,
And we don't have good models for this. Our cultural models are, we need to be strong for others. We need to keep busy. Time heals. All of these
yeah.
unhealthy notions that continue to get promoted as ways to get through grief. So I think one of the things that I really want to stress today is what grief is. So
Yes.
we use the words grief and mourning interchangeably,
Mhm,
but they are not the same thing.
mhm.
Grief is the normal, natural, innate response to disappointment and loss. Everyone grieves. And everyone responds to grief uniquely. So it's influenced by your temperament, your personality, and certainly by the circumstances of the loss, whether it's the death of someone precious, or family estrangement, or job loss, or a health diagnosis. And grief impacts us cognitively, physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually, and sometimes severely. So that's what grief is. And we have our own reaction to grief and our own behavior or experience of grief. Now, mourning is giving grief the attention it deserves.
Mm.
So mourning is the expression of grief. Mourning is going public with our grief. So everyone grieves, but not everyone mourns. And it's my opinion that mourning is the path to regaining a sense of well-being after a loss. We need to talk about it.
Mhm.
We need to be honest about the hurt or the disappointment. And the weight of grief is really undelivered emotional communication. So it's that wishing you could say one more time, I love you, or I wish, or I regret, or I remember. All of that expression. And now, the person might not be physically present to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you go with that?
Mm-hmm.
With that expression? But that's the piece that I really feel like our culture is missing.
Yeah.
Is that mourning piece.
Mm-hmm.
We used to do it so well when everybody came into the parlor, because that's where the body was.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have handed that off to the professionals.
Yeah.
And we even let the greeting cards express things for us. And so there's this disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to show up for each other in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you make such a distinct difference between the two. And me and my husband were actually talking about this last night, how different we have responded to it. And it's almost like the love languages, but it's like the different ways to grieve. So he made an urn. Okay. He spent hours and hours and hours on the urn that his father's ashes would be placed in and then buried. And
That's
he put
beautiful.
so much time in picking the wood and carving it. And I mean, just a beautiful expression. He talked about how when he was in that space, he was asking his father questions. He was connecting with him. And then he was working on the program for the funeral. And for me, like, I just want to talk. Like, I don't want to do so many things. Like, I just want you to sit there and just like listen to me almost run through everything that's going through my head. Like, this is a funny story, but right after it happened, I was getting tea from a little coffee house down the street, and it's a girl that I've been in there many times. And she goes, hey, Casey, how you doing? And I'm like, my father-in-law just died. Like, it literally just like came out of my mouth. But the more that I was able to talk about it and just like say it to other people, the more like I was able to process through it. But my husband didn't want to talk about it at all. And so just understanding that it's not better or worse, and I know that he doesn't want to talk about it. That's okay. He already has his space. But I think recognizing that there's so many different ways in that healing journey, right?
Well, and I think it's such human nature. We want an answer. We want a formula, and not realizing that what we have in front of us is a very unique experience for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so to find our own way of expressing it, what you just shared is a perfect example. And there are so many things that we can do. We can use art. We can use creating ritual.
Mm-hmm.
So many people recommend, writing in a journal, or maybe even writing letters, expressing this undelivered emotional communication, what you wish you had said but didn't get a chance to, or maybe even what you wish you hadn't said, sort of really expressing the regret, that kind of thing. But it's not going to surprise you that I think the most beneficial technique to apply in grief is emotional freedom techniques, EFT or tapping.
Yeah.
And, I've been a companion to grievers for almost 18 years now. And what I recognize over this time is that, one, grievers tend to isolate because they have this lack of understanding from the people in their orbit, or from, these cultural messages. And so they tend to just sort of internalize everything and not express it. And you and I know that kind of lack of expression, that stuffing emotion is what contributes to illness and disease.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty common for grievers to end up having a compromised immune system,
Mhm.
because they're just really depleted in so many ways.
Yeah. And I think
And
especially
so,
right now with everything that's going on,
yes,
it's almost a forced isolation. So those of us that maybe wouldn't naturally turn inward and retreat are just being forced to do that.
right,
What with these
exactly.
losses, like even with, and you can speak more to this, but the loss of a pet, the loss of a job, like we are grieving so many different things, but we're forced to grieve in isolation and not being able to talk to our friends, and have that connection and have that human contact and getting hugs, like how important that is. We're forced to be isolated. And for me, I just feel like this is going to be so deeply traumatizing for people, that EFT is just such a great tool to work through this stuff. You can do it on your own, absolutely. But also working with someone, for someone to just support you in that space and hold space for you while you work through those emotions. And one of
And
them can be the isolation.
the reason I think it's such a beneficial technique is, one, it gives you permission to tell the truth. That's what I always tell my clients. This is your
Yeah.
chance. Shutting out all of those cultural influences, or your family that's giving you the impression that you should be over it already, or
Yes.
you don't want to be the complainer or the whiner or whatever it is. But this gives you permission. In fact, that's the purpose of it,
Hmm.
is to tell the truth about what's going on with you. So I think that's number one, why it's such a great application for someone who's grieving,
Yeah.
because they can say all the things that they're thinking.
Hmm.
And not every relationship is rosy.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it can feel like a betrayal to say, well, my relationship with this person wasn't always great.
Yeah.
But who do I say that to? That feels disrespectful.
Hmm.
Um, if it's job loss, if it's a health diagnosis,
Hmm.
we really are met with this so much comparing, you know. Um, well, at least my situation isn't as bad as my neighbor, or
Yes.
and comparing is human nature.
Yeah.
That's how we make sense of things. But when it comes to loss, it is not useful. It
Mm.
is not useful. Your stuff is your stuff.
Mm.
And if your precious pet has died during this time, and you're watching other people get a new puppy, and you're feeling like you can't express this, and it wasn't a person, and we have relationships with our pets.
Yes.
That's significant, and it needs expression. And
Yes.
that's why I love tapping. And now you and I also know that it's not just about the language, it's not just about the expression.
Hmm.
There is something physiological going on when we're moving energy along these meridian pathways of the body.
Yeah.
We are sending a signal to that most primitive part of the brain that gets engaged under stress. We're regulating the stress response.
Hmm.
And I know the very first study I read about EFT years ago was the one out of Harvard that talked about a reduction in cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And after tapping, that hormone was reduced in the bloodstream.
Hmm.
So we know it's not just a way to kind of take our mind off of things. There is really something physiological going on in the body. It doesn't change the fact that we have something challenging in front of us, but how wonderful if the body can be a more cooperative component to bring calm and clarity to whatever problem you might have to solve, or something that you need to face in your life, maybe a present day stress or something you anticipate is going to be stressful. And then I think the most potent way to use it is to look at some things that you're carrying from your past.
Mm,
But all of these can come into play when you're talking about a grief experience,
yeah.
you know, whether it's health or your job, or the lack of connection with someone in your family. I
Or
don't
a
know how many
marriage.
times.
There's a lot of
Yes,
women right now that are struggling in their relationships, and some of
yes,
them, this has been it's like force them to face things, because I think so often women will stay in sometimes, abusive relationships because you're going through the motions and you're just keep on keeping on. Whereas this has been such a pause where I think a lot of women are looking at things and like, do I really want to stay with this person? You know? And so now it might be grieving a marriage, and everything that goes along with that. But I love that you talked about telling the truth, right? And I think that's a really great way, because a lot of the people that are watching are already tappers. Um,
mhm,
and so the first, I think, just to give them really tangible ways that they can utilize this for grief, utilizing EFT as a self-help tool right now. One, telling the truth, like really, what are you feeling right now, right? The
mhm.
second I love, and maybe you do this, I don't remember who I even got this from, but just saying the words, I miss this person, right? Just tuning into that feeling, I just miss them. And then tapping like, I miss them, and it just really, I've seen that so much with clients where it just kind of releases some of that sadness and all those emotions. Um, and then the other way is like very similar to what you were saying before, is to have kind of like through journaling, is to say everything that you want to say to them while you're tapping,
Yes,
right? And that can be just, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to say the right words. It doesn't have to be perfect. EFT can be messy. It doesn't, people sometimes are like, oh, I have to have the perfect setup. You don't have to. It's just the feeling behind it. It's getting things out. And so just even saying the things that you wanted to say, and it could be good or bad, but just tapping while you're doing it. And it can be in your head or out loud. Um, but those are just ways that can really be helpful in utilizing it as a self-help tool to just push that grief through you and that sadness and all those emotions, so they don't get stuck and that energy doesn't get blocked. Do you have any other creative ways that you use with clients or for yourself?
well, one of the things I want to say is that I think we do get kind of hung up on the language,
Yes.
like, oh, I need to, how do I express this? What do I have to say? And you and I know that it can be effective if we're just even saying one word or one phrase.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
deep
Or I've had people like say, like,
sadness.
I just feel ugh. I'm like, let's use that,
Yes,
even though I feel ugh. Like, it doesn't have to be
right,
perfect.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. To say, but I mean, my favorite way is to give voice to everything,
Mm,
just like I think of jazz improvisation. Just say whatever is in this theme
yeah.
and just go with it. And then, check in. How do I feel after and then one more thing. And then you keep going on whatever that topic is.
Hmm.
So I really think it's so important to develop a feelings vocabulary too,
Yes.
because I think that's another thing that is so lacking for most of us.
Yes.
We never learned that.
Hmm.
And what a great opportunity. I encourage anybody who has young children who's on this call or listening to this to start modeling that for your children. I think about back in the day when I called it the bewitching hour, right before dinner. Everybody's hangry, and there's that time. Use that as an opportunity to say, right now I'm really frustrated, or I'm
Hmm.
feeling, um, not quite myself. I think
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry. To talk about not just feelings, but maybe states of being. I
Yeah.
feel exhausted. It's
Hmm.
a great way to develop your vocabulary, but also model it for your children, because I
Yeah.
think
And
that's so important.
so, so important. And I tell moms too, to like, in order to like help them kind of learn that emotional vocabulary, even saying something like to your child, like, it looks like you're feeling angry right now. Is that right? Do you feel that in your body right now? You look really angry, and helping them to label it, because I don't know about you, but when I started my whole healing journey, like it was just anxious. But there's so many other feelings underneath that umbrella of anxiety, right? And it's like, I'm angry, I'm worried about this, I'm thinking about this, I'm afraid about that, and there's so many other things there. Where with tapping, you're able to kind of go through all of those emotions and get to the root of it. Because a lot of times it's multiple emotions, not even just the one. And so you can feel two emotions at once. And just like you said, just continuing to keep that conversation open and modeling that for your child. Like, and I don't cry alone in my closet. When I am sad, I cry in front of my children. And I try to be really open about that. And I know on occasion I'll run to the closet just because I need my space and need to be away, but I never try and hide it. And I think it's good for them to not only see me have them, watch me have emotions, but then they also see what I'm doing, which is tapping, how to regulate myself. And even if they're really little and they're like, oh, I don't know about tapping, the more that they see you do it, you're helping to program their little brains and teaching them healthy ways to cope. Because so many of us as children learn unhealthy ways to cope. And so by giving yourself that gift of tapping and showing it to them, and, tapping on yourself, like you're really preparing them and teaching them resilience now, which is just the most important thing, I think, right now. Yeah. So I
Well,
love that
our
you brought that up.
trainer, John D. Whitus,
Yes.
would say, EFT or tapping is a life processing tool.
Yeah.
And it really is that versatile, can be used for anything that's distressing. And when I was in my very first training, there was a mom who was using it with her very young child.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say her daughter was maybe 3 years old, and she was using it at bedtime as a way to just talk about the day. And she wasn't able to do the kind of the follow the leader, so she was actually tapping on her.
Yeah.
And the little girl started saying, "Mommy, can you tap me into bed?" And I think about what a brilliant message that would be at bedtime.
Yeah.
One, to give your child the message that they can talk about it all.
Mm-hmm.
But then this feeling of, physiologically calming down the nervous system.
Yeah.
I mean, what a gift to our
Yeah.
children. As you say, if we learn how to self-regulate and then model for our children, it'll be such a gift for them as they process
Yes.
the challenging experiences that they're bound to have.
Yes. And I think especially with how sensitive these kiddos are going to be, and it's just because they're wired differently because of the pandemic and everything occurring, your brain is just wired differently at this point. And giving them a tool that they can also use with others. So my daughter will, I think as a sensitive person, to see someone else in pain is one of the most difficult things. And I think as moms, like, to watch your kids in pain is probably the most difficult thing that you can experience. And so for them to have a tool that they can use to work with others, because my daughter has taught a lot of other kids to tap and tapped with them. And the other, and I've shared this story a couple times in this group, but when I got really emotional, when I heard that my father-in-law wasn't going to make it, I started crying on the floor, and my daughter came up and she was tapping on me.
That gives
So
me
she,
goosebumps.
I
That's
know,
just
it
so
was like
beautiful.
so beautiful. And she's 9 years old. So she came up, she was tapping on me. She went and got water. Mom, can I get you water? Well, that's what I do for her. And I didn't tell her, hey, can you tap on me? Can you get me some water? But I have done it so many times with her, and she's seen me do it so many times for myself, that it's like, you can't not do it, because that's what you've learned.
Well, and that's another thing that I share with my clients. Under stress, we forget all of our strategies.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to put Post-it notes everywhere. I have little buttons that I hand out that say "even though" on them, because that's the language we use to start a tapping round.
Yes.
But if you can habituate this,
Mm-hmm.
make this so much a part of your life that then when something stressful happens, it really becomes a default. You immediately start
Yes.
tapping. And I have a client who started bookending her days.
Mm-hmm.
She would start her day just kind of doing a check-in, like, oh gosh, I'm already worried about something.
Mm-hmm.
And she would tap to calm her nervous system so that she
Yes.
could step into her day without that kind of emotional um, unease.
Yeah.
And then she would tap at bedtime, whatever's still bumping around in her head, whatever she was still ruminating about,
Yeah.
in order to calm herself before bed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think those kinds of things, whatever we can do, when I work with teenagers, I suggest that they habitually tap before they do the homework in their most challenging subject.
Yes.
Um, so I teach this obviously before a test, before a music audition, before a sports tryout, that kind of thing, because we want our bodies to be in that more aligned state.
Yeah.
And I
Even just,
can't,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah. And just kind of piggybacking off that, like going into a funeral now. So this weekend, I know that it's going to be emotionally charged. And so instead of going in like this, I'm going to do a ton of tapping the night before as I'm getting in the car, driving to, my mother-in-law's house, so that I can calm myself and enter into that space with a calm presence so that I can be helpful to others too. So I'm not coming in crazy.
Mhm. Well, and it doesn't mean that you won't cry or have emotion.
Yes, yes,
That's certainly not the message of this, is like, oh, let's
yes,
make that go away. It
yeah,
really is about expressing. It really is about processing. And I think that if there's any bottom line message today, is how important it is for us to express our grief.
yes. Yeah,
And
and with your kids too, because I know that
Mhm.
I had a friend who lost someone and her children just reacted so differently to it. So her son was really emotional about it, but her daughter showed no emotion, was just like, yeah, that happened. And, but I was trying to explain to her, that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to like push emotions out of her. It'll come in time. And she's just processing in a different way. But also to be able to sit with your kids in that sadness and not feel the pressure to rescue them from those feelings, sitting in that space and just saying, yeah, this is really sad. I'm sad too. This is really sad, and just allowing them to sit in that and let those emotions out. And that's hard to do. It's really hard to do.
I think there are so many expectations. So, as a griever, you might have expectations about how you want people to react to you. And then you'll be so disappointed when they don't know how to show up.
Yeah.
And then the other, we have all these cultural expectations about, being strong. And I've heard this anecdote more than once about the parent who says, my child doesn't seem to be sad, and her
Yes.
dad died, or you know
Yes.
and then with a little digging you find out that mom is going behind closed doors
Mm,
and not letting her emotion show. So she's unwittingly modeling what she's worried about in her child, is not showing this emotion, but that's exactly what she's shown to her child.
yeah.
So these are all things that we don't even realize. They're so much a part of what we see on television. We always see famous people and their spouses. Oh, look how strong she is.
Hmm.
And so then we think that's the measure for how we should behave.
Yeah.
And I really want to be a part of a cultural shift
Mm.
where we know how to show up for each other, not to say the right thing or do the perfect thing, but to sit next to someone, to companion someone in this.
Mm. Yeah. And that was one of my biggest questions, is like, how do you support someone? Because I think there is that piece where you don't want to say the wrong thing, right? And so what are some good things to say to someone that is going through this, or what can you do to be helpful, to
Well, back
support someone?
when I was first, my first experiences with this profound grief, the best advice I got was just show up,
Mm.
because so many people won't. And it really is about, the image I have is sitting next to somebody.
Mm.
I heard so many stories about, I got a Hallmark card and they just signed their name.
Yeah.
The value in sharing an anecdote,
Yes.
something that's remembered, or even reflecting a story that you've told about your loved one, that kind of thing. We think that by speaking up or saying something, we're going to make them somehow more sad.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to send a card when it would have been the anniversary
Mm.
or would have been the birthday, that kind of acknowledgement. You can't know how that feels for somebody,
Yeah. I love
because the
that.
absence is so palpable for them.
Yeah.
And when somebody else notices, and yet culturally, again, we stay away because what if I say the wrong thing?
Yep.
So I think that whole idea that we have to say the perfect thing, more just I'm sorry, some way, some version of that.
Yep. Yep. And I love that and even with you talking about that, I was just remembering, I was asking my husband what's been helpful for him. And he mentioned that he had just posted on Facebook about his father, and just reading the memories, just like short little ones in the comments, was really one of the best things for him. It was just, he's like, it's so nice just to know that other people, thought so highly of him as well. And especially right now when we can't do a formal funeral, we're not going to have a ton of people there. It's just going to be our family. It's really nice to hear those stories and know that other people were thinking, are thinking about him as well and remembering those times as well. I think that's a great, great point. So thank you for sharing that.
The other piece of expression that maybe doesn't come as naturally to us is sort of the expression of the hopes, the dreams, the expectations, the things that now cannot happen.
Yeah.
And whether it is the death of someone precious or a job that you loved suddenly coming to an end because of these circumstances. I mean, that has to bring up so much emotion. A health diagnosis, having to make a decision about, do I go in for this surgery that is elective, but if I don't do it now, it could become something more serious, and then I'm going to be in an emergent. I mean, expressing and processing all of the emotions of that.
Yeah.
So when I talk about grief and loss, I use a very broad brush definition. It really is anything that is distressing, uncomfortable, out of harmony.
Yeah. And there's so much going on right now. I mean, you look at these poor kiddos that have lost their prom, have lost, athletic seasons. Like there's just so much loss going on right now. And just like you said, you don't have to compare, like, oh my gosh, here I am complaining about, how we missed a softball season and someone else just lost a loved one. Like there, you don't have to compare. You just be really true to your emotions and what you're feeling. And I love that you brought up even just sorting through those before like a test, or because what tapping does is it's turning off that emotional piece so you can think clearly and you can make decisions. And when you are grieving, when you have lost a loved one, you still have to make a lot of decisions. And especially when you look at like some of the women that are struggling in their marriages, you still have to use that part of your brain to make a lot of decisions and to think clearly, because it's not just you, it's your kids, and a lot of other people are affected by that. And so being able to turn that emotional part off, and then be able to think clearly. And that's what EFT does, is it sorts through those emotions, it allows it to run through you. And then you're like, oh, now I can think rationally and clearly again. Like it's just a whole different, it's like someone, if you need glasses, I can't see anything. And now it's like, oh my gosh, now I can see clearly. That's like the best way that I can like articulate how I feel before and after I tap. But
And I can't think of a more stressful time than when you're grieving.
Yes. Yep.
And so, I saw that's why I was attracted to EFT with my
Mhm.
clients, because I was just noticing how paralyzing it could be.
Yep.
And, the difficulty in making decisions or even taking a step.
Yes.
And here's a lovely visual aid that I bring out for my clients. Loss is cumulative.
Mm.
So that when you have these experiences that aren't reconciled, that aren't processed, they connect to each other. And
Mm.
so sometimes in midlife, we might have a loss that we, through our adult mind or through our intellect, you're thinking, well, that's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But if it's the link that's been added to your proverbial chain, it could be the one thing that topples you over.
Mm.
And what you're not recognizing is it's all of this loss that's not been looked at or reconciled. And that's another use for EFT, is really taking a look at the things that have happened in the past that really have meaning in the present.
Mm-hmm.
There's the brilliant book, The Body Keeps the Score, and he talks about
Yes.
that. The past is present.
Yep.
And so to take a look at what this is bringing up for you, it can trigger things that are rooted in past events or past limiting beliefs or thought processes or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's almost hard to wrap your mind around how something that you're doing today could actually reconcile something that happened in the past. But we're energetic beings. We
Yes.
carry that with us.
Yeah. And those are
And
open wounds that haven't
yes,
been healed and
right.
tended to. We just kind of slapped a Band-Aid on them. And when we go through something similar, it's just kind of reopening that wound, right? And I don't think a lot of people understand that or make that connection, that whatever's going on with you now could be very well connected to childhood events, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and another way to think about it is it's vibrating on the same frequency.
Yes.
And
Yep.
so that's getting your attention because and it could be that your body's getting the signal before you may not even have a conscious thought about what it is, but
Mm-hmm.
something has made you uncomfortable in the moment. And then that can be a tapping target, not even
Yep.
knowing. But
Yep.
wow, I just got triggered and I'm feeling it in my stomach. Ooh,
Yep.
this feeling in my stomach. I don't even know what it's about, but it's not comfortable. And
Yep.
and to calm it down that way. You and I know that there are so many doors you can walk through with EFT. And I use these three words if this is helpful: distress,
Mm-hmm.
discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
disharmony.
Mm.
It seems to kind of cover anything that could be out of whack in your life.
Yeah.
And so whatever it is, make that the tapping target and just see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Might lead you to a memory,
Yeah.
might lead you to something that you weren't really connected with in a present day stress.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could be connected to uh, some fear about something in the future.
Yeah.
And that's why I love EFT and how it can be applied in so many ways.
Yeah. And so um, for people that are using it as a self-help tool, and especially in grief, how do you know when you need to take it a step further and maybe reach out for some help? Like, how do you know that this is normal, or, hey, I probably need a little help here? How do you kind of distinguish that difference there?
Yeah, gosh, that is such a good question. Um, I would hope that people would just be really connected to kind of their own um, physiology, how they feel,
Yeah.
um, and not to apply, some sort of time frame, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another thing that we do is
Yep.
like, why am I still feeling this? It's been
Yeah.
a
It's
month,
been a month now.
right,
Like, I should be on the
right,
other side. Why am I still
yes,
crying? Yeah.
yes. So there's that kind of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess my opinion is that I wish our culture supported the idea that we should all have a therapist, just like we have a
Right?
dentist, you know,
Amen.
because there is such value, and we know that saying things aloud, just expressing our circumstances, also reduces cortisol, which is why talk therapy can be such a helpful tool. So if somebody really does want to seek therapy
Mhm.
about a grief issue, I guess what I would really encourage them to do is make sure that the person understands grief and loss. Not every therapist, does, and they'll probably admit it.
Yeah.
Um, but there are also some therapists who promote some of these unhealthy notions about how we get through grief, like keeping busy and time heals, and be strong for others, and you have to grieve alone. It's really this solitary process. There are some really that you could somehow replace the loss with some other hobby or activity.
Yeah.
So I would really make sure that the therapist you're choosing states that that's one of their specialties.
Yeah.
And I certainly have some in the Chicago area, people that I would recommend, but it's a very short list.
Yeah.
Because of I really want people to be met with good information. But if somebody, I'm going to put in the down thread some resources,
We'll
and
put
I
your information
consider,
in there, how
and I'll
people
put
can reach out. Yeah.
yes, because I consider myself, I like being a clearinghouse.
Mhm.
Obviously I love working with people and companioning people in grief,
Mhm.
but I also like connecting them to good books and good internet resources. And there is a place through Psychology Today to find a therapist by using your zip code and then putting in detailed information about what what issue you really want to look at.
Do you work with
So
children, Lynn?
I have worked with parents to help their children.
Yeah, that's kind of what I do too, mostly.
Yeah,
I'll
and
work with children, but I try to really empower the moms
right.
too.
So
Mhm.
I also learned, if I work with even a teenager,
Mhm.
I have learned to bring the parent in for the first session,
Yeah.
because I want, it is, there's a dual purpose there. It
Yes.
educates the parent, also, just sort of sets the stage for then, if the child or teen wants to continue to work with me. The youngest that I've worked with in a one-to-one is 12.
Okay.
But basically, I really want to establish kind of some understanding with the parent
Yes.
of what it's about. And I think the parent, it's that overused analogy about putting the oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, I know.
But
Putting your
it's,
mask on first is super
yeah,
overused right now.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. But
Hey.
clearly the adults in the room are more calm. It's going to have an impact on the energy
Yes,
of, the relationship with the children and how they're dealing with things too.
absolutely. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to add about grief or about anything about EFT?
So I guess I really just want to say grief is normal and natural. And so the crucial piece of that is the expression of it.
Hmm.
And that it is possible to regain a sense of well-being after loss. I really believe we are meant to live in joy.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that sitting right next to it is something really uncomfortable, something you wish hadn't happened,
Hmm.
you wish you hadn't had to deal with.
Yeah.
So, but the expression of it is the crucial piece, whether it's art or ritual. But the processing of it is crucial. We're not storing it then, and
Hmm.
it makes room for creating what's next, for creating um, that next chapter, maybe the one we didn't picture or plan for or want.
Mhm. That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for
Well,
joining
thanks
me
for inviting
today.
me to have this conversation.
Oh my
And if
gosh,
anybody
yes.
wants to be in touch with me, I'm going to leave my information in the I guess on Facebook
I
as a
will post
comment.
it. I'll put it at the top, actually, um, in the like the title part. I'll post all your
Okay.
information in there. Everything that you gave me for the event, I'll just go ahead and pop that in there. And
Okay.
then if there's anything that I'm missing in that, you can go ahead and just pop it in the comments then.
Very good.
Sound
All
good?
right. Let's chat again sometime.
Let's do it, sister. It's been too long.
All right.
All right. Thanks again, Lynn.
Thanks. I'll be thinking of you this weekend.
Aw, thank you.
All
Well,
right.
take
Take
care.
care.